Rosensweig. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, how are you?
Good. So I'm not really going to introduce you, but I wanted to really publicly thank you, for giving all these Yom Tovim classes. They really inspire many of us for Yontif. And thank you for being so flexible. And I told everyone before you came on the schedule, next week's Yom Kippur, then we skip a week, and then we do Chol Hamoed Sukkos, all on Tuesdays, right, Rabbi?
Yes.
We're speaking with Tuesdays at 7:30. So the time's not changing. And I also want to thank you this summer for extending our Shiur during COVID. You didn't really have a vacation, but very grateful for. We learned, I think, June, July, and a good part of August, if I recall. So I wanted to publicly thank you and wish you Ksiva Sima Tova, and thank you for everything you do for the shul. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the very kind and warm words of introduction. It was a pleasure to extend the shiurim, and I know that people were home, so we had the opportunity to do that. And I enjoyed the ongoing Shakavatariya and Maso Matan, the exchange with the group that is part of the regular shiur. And Mir Hashem, we look forward to another productive year. We began actually last week with the first shiur on this year's Limud Masechet Psachim. So we'll pick up with that Mir Hashem after Sukkot. Could be not that Monday, because I think I do have a wedding, but a wedding on that, Tuesday. I think I have a wedding on that Tuesday night, so maybe the one after. We'll figure that out as we go forward. And we look forward again to another year of learning together. So I'm also very happy to hear, if you tell me if my intelligence is right, that the shul has been opening up, and that la'at la'at people are able to daven physically in the shul. So that's really wonderful milestone.
Yes, Baruch Hashem, we opened Sunday, so we're fully operational now.
Terrific.
For davening.
Yeah, for now we're on Zoom, so stay tuned.
Okay.
But, we look forward, I guess, in the right time.
So come back, yeah. I'm assuming while you're doing it remotely also, right?
We're doing a hybrid. After Yontif, we'll be doing a hybrid tilted to in-person, hopefully, if things stay the same. Before Yontif, we've been doing once a week, partially in person, but mostly on Zoom.
Okay.
So
we'll be in touch.
Yeah. And as Jacob just mentioned, next week and the week and 2 weeks from after that, we'll have a special shiurim for Yontif. Okay, so let's begin. So this year is a very unusual year. It happens, every, I don't know what the exact percentages are, but 25% of the time, or that when Rosh Hashana falls out on Shabbos, that, of course, on the first day, we do not blow shofar. The Tekiyah shofar is pushed off only the second day. Typically, we blow shofar 2 days. Even in Eretz Yisrael, actually, we blow 2 days. Even in the Mikdash, it's called Yom HaRichta. We treat the 2 days of Rosh Hashana as if they're one long extended Yom Tov. That's very unusual. Normally, in Eretz Yisrael, and certainly in the Mikdash, we have only 1 day of Yom Tov. In Torah, that is the case as well. But when it comes to shofar, we have this special consideration, because Kiddush HaChodesh, the pronouncing of the new moon, was typically done, on Rosh Hashana, because Rosh Hashana is also Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, it wasn't always known, even in the Mikdash itself, until quite a bit later in the day, that indeed it was going to be Rosh Hashana. And therefore, they had the contingency if the Eidim didn't show up at a certain point and it wasn't clear, so they made 2 days of Rosh Hashana. That's the origin of what we call Yom HaRichta. Even in Chutz La'aretz, even in the diaspora, there's a difference between Rosh Hashanah and the other Chagim with regard to certain practices that we have. The fact that they, across the board, created 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, even in the Mikdash, even in Eretz Yisrael, at a certain point, and made it a Yom HaRichta, like a 48-hour day. So that spills over even into our own practice. So that, for example, typically, you always say Shehechiyanu Birchas Hazman on the second day of Yom Tov, because the whole idea of Yom Tov Sheni Shogolios in the diaspora is that it's either day number 1 or day number 2. But when it comes to Rosh Hashana and Tkiyah Shofar and Kiddush, there's actually a major debate among the authorities whether you say only one Shechiyanu on the first day or you say on both days. Mostly our practice is based on a responsum, a tshuva written by Rashi, who thinks that, we do say it both days. But there are other issues as well.
But that's why we get a Shechianu, right? The second night you're supposed to have a new fruit, just like a hedge.
Yeah, so the reason that we try to have an extra Shechianu on the table, and the same thing, the Baal Tzkiya, typically, not this year, as I'll explain in a moment, but in normal years, the Baal Tzkiya tries to wear something new, etc., so that to cover those views that say that really you don't repeat Shechiyanu on the second day. Now again, on Sukkot, on Pesach, I'm hearing myself echo. I don't know why that is.
Sorry. I apologize.
Okay, no apologies.
Sorry.
Just want to make sure it's not from my side. On Sukkot, on Pesach, on Shavuos, we don't need a special fruit on the table to say Shechiyanu for Yom Tov Sheni Shogolios, because it's either one day or the other, and the Din D'Rabbanan is that we treat each day as if it's the only day, and therefore, of course, you make a Shechiyanu on the second day without any kind of further excuse or covering. However, on Rosh Hashana, we always make sure on the second day that we have, as you say, a Shechiyanu on the table, or the Baal Tzkiya has a Shechiyanu that he's wearing for the din of Yom Tov HaRichta. On the other hand, Yom HaRichta. On the other hand, this year, of course, you don't really need that for the shofar part. You do need it for the meal part and for Kiddush, because we're only going to be blowing shofar on the second day, not on the first day. So there are many differences between the din of Yom HaRichta, the 48-hour day of Rosh Hashana and other days. And that's a topic in its own right, which we're not going to examine very much in detail this evening. What I wanted to discuss this evening is the issue of, and especially the implications of, Rosh Hashana, Shachal, B'Shabbos. Rosh Hashana coincides with Shabbos, which it does this year. So what happens under those circumstances? Let me highlight it by discussing an issue in the Nusach HaTfilah first, and then I'll try to compare it to something else, and then we'll see how far we get. It's a long topic, but we're not going to get through all of the Mar Makomos. I hope everybody received the Mar Makomos, but we'll hopefully get through some of them. Okay, let's begin. The background for all this is the Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashana and the Gemara there. In the beginning of the Mar Makomos, we have this. The Mishnah is on page 1. 1 second. We're told that Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashana Shechal Lios B'Shabbos, if Rosh Hashana falls out on Shabbos, Mikdash Hayutoken.
It's a lecture about Rosh Hashana.
Aval lo b'Medina. If Rosh Hashana falls out on a Shabbos, you blow shofar in the Beis HaMikdash, but you do not blow shofar outside of the Beis HaMikdash, because it's Shabbos, as we'll explain. And then we're told, Mishachara Beis HaMikdash, once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a special enactment, Sheyutoken b'chol makom sheish bo bezdin, that any place where there's a bezdin, there's a discussion then in the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Rishonim, what kind of bezdin? We'll see that in a moment. That whenever there was a bezdin, they would institute Tkiyah Shofar even on Shabbos. So if the Fifth Avenue Synagogue had the right kind of bezdin, we would blow shofar on Shabbos as well. But it does not, so just to be clear about it, there should be no Tkiyah Shofar on this Rosh Hashanah, Shecholios B'Shabbos. Then the Mishnah elaborates, Rabbi Lazar, maybe only where the Bezin Hagadol, the Supreme Court of the Jewish people, is sitting, like in Yavne after it left Yerushalayim. Amrlo, Echad Yavne, Echad Kol Makom Sheish Bo Bezdin. No, not only in Yavne, but in other places as well. The question is, what kind of Bezin? A Bezin of Kiddush HaChodesh, a Bezin of Chav Gimel of 23, a Bezin of 3. Not so clear. The details of that we'll skip over for now. But the point that we're trying to make is that really the Mishnah is introducing two very interesting halachos. One is that in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they would blow only in the Mikdash and nowhere else on Shabbos. In other words, b'Medina, you don't blow shofar on Shabbos. You only blow in the Mikdash. And Mishachar of Beis HaMikdash, they substituted Mokom Sheish Bezdin for the Mikdash, so you could blow there as well. But again, there's no Tkiyas Shofar otherwise on Shabbos. And then the Mishnah concludes, V'od zos hosa b'Yerushalayim, V'seir al Yavne, Shekol ir she'iroa v'shama sukrova, V'yechol alavo token, V'yavne lo yetoken, ela b'vezin v'vad. There's a difference between Yerushalayim and places like Yavne. As long as the blowing took place in Yerushalayim, here there's a debate among the Rishonim whether this is only during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, or even after the Mikdash was destroyed, but for the first few years where there was the takana of Makom Bezdin. So the original Makom Bezdin was still Yerushalayim. Either way, in Yerushalayim, you could blow on Shabbos in whichever of those times, not only if you were in the Mikdash or in the presence of the Bezdin, but even if you lived like in one of the outer regions of it. But in any other place, they only blew in the presence of Bezdin itself. So it's a fascinating Mishnah, and it teaches us basically three halachos. Number one, that typically you do not blow shofar on Shabbos. That's our main focus. And that there are two exceptions. One is during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, in the Beis HaMikdash you blew shofar. And the other is after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, that was shifted to a Makom Bezdin. Those are the three halachos of the Mishnah. And the Gemara immediately analyzes the first of these halachos. What do we mean when we say, and why is it that we do not blow shofar on Shabbos? Okay, so the Gemara says, Minani Milu. Let's follow in the text for the moment. How do you know that you don't blow shofar on Shabbos? So the Gemara says a very fascinating thing. Rab Levi bar Lachma, Rab Chama bar Chanina, Kasav Echad Omer Shabboson Zichron Trua, the Kasav Echad Omer Yom Trua Yilachem. Lo kasha. Kan biyom tov shecholios b'Shabbos. Kan biyom tov shecholios b'chol. So what the Gemara says is the following idea. There are two parshios in the Torah that speak of Rosh Hashana, and by extension that speak of shofar. One is in the parsha of the Moadim in Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor, Ela Mikroi Kodesh, right? Ela Moadeh Hashem Asher Tikro Sam B'Moadam. Right, that's the main parsha in which the Torah elaborates the Moadim. In that parsha, the Torah uses the expression about Rosh Hashanah that it is a day of Zichron Trua, the memory of the Trua, of Tkiyas Shofar. It's a strange usage. The Ramban, in his Perush on the Torah, in Emor, and in his very elaborate drasha, Ramban wrote a drasha on Rosh Hashanah, which we have copies of. It's been published. And there he analyzes, all the psukim connected with Rosh Hashanah. In both places, the Ramban notes that the term Zichron Trua, the memory of the shofar, is a very strange term. Ultimately, the Ramban says it means Yom Hadin. Okay. A strange way of saying Yom Adin, frankly. But Zichron Trua is a hard phrase to translate. If you look at the Mefarshim, Rashi, right, the Sforno, the Rachaim, all this, every Mefarish practically has a different interpretation of what Zichron Trua is trying to accomplish. I'll mention Rashi because we're going to get back to it. Rashi in Parshas Emor, I believe I have that here in the Marmakomos. Just 1 second. Or maybe not. No, I didn't bring it. Rashi in Parshas Emor says that Zichron Trua means the psukim of Zichronos and Shofros. As we know, in Musaf, right, Musaf of Rosh Hashana is unique. Instead of the regular amount of brachos, there are extra brachos, right, from Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. So the word Zichron Trua, according to Rashi, refers to the psukim of Zichronos and the psukim of Shofaros. Ramban doesn't like it. The Ramban says, it sounds like from the Gemara that those extra psukim are only a din d'Rabbanan, they're only rabbinic requirement. How can they be the pshat and the pasuk? If I get a chance, I'll get back to that point. Either way, the point I'm trying to make is that in Parshas Emor we use the phrase Zichron Trua, and that phrase is challenging, right? It is subject to many, many interpretations. But that's how the Torah characterizes shofar. In Parshas Pinchas, the Torah has another usage, another way of formulating the din of Tkiyah Shofar. There the Torah says, Yom Trua Yelachem. Now, the day of Rosh Hashana, we're talking about the Karbonos Musaf that you bring on the Moed. So the Torah says, Yom Trua Yelachem. That's a day in which we blow shofar. That's a much easier makar. Yom, a day of Trua, of shofar. Although the characterization of the day by the mitzvah that we perform is itself an interesting phenomenon. So those are the two terms that the Torah uses about Rosh Hashanah and shofar. Yom Trua in Bamidbar and Zichron Trua in Emor. So the Gemara says, how come there are two psukim and they sound different? And the Gemara concludes that one, Zichron Trua, refers to Rosh Hashanah Shekol Yos B'Shabbos, where we don't blow shofar. We don't blow shofar, and therefore all we have, this is the Gemara's interpretation, is Zichron Trua, a memory of the Tkiyah Shofar. It's only a memory, it's only psukim, or we can only remember it nostalgically, because we don't blow it, because it's Shabbos. But Yom Trua Yelachem, that is the characterization that applies for the typical Rosh Hashanah, which falls out on a chol, on a regular day, where there is befoal actually Tkiyah Shofar. That's called Yom Trua Yelachem. So the two psukim are merames, they hint to us that on Shabbos there's no Tkiyah Shofar. That's the Gemara's initial conclusion. Okay? This is very stunning. It's stunning because it implies that the refraining or the abstaining from Tkiyah Shofar on Shabbos is Minat Torah. It's a biblical origin. We'll see in a moment that the Talmud Bavli rejects it ultimately. But that is a very surprising even Havamina. And we'll see if it's more than that. Moreover, what to me is very surprising about it is that the term Zichron Trua, which is in the main parsha of the Moadim, Parshas Emor, would be used to characterize something that takes place in a minority of Rosh Hashanahs. I don't know what the percentage is, 30% of the time, 25% of the time, whatever it is. How often does Rosh Hashanah fall on Shabbos as opposed to Chol? Certainly in the minority. So the main characterization of shofar, Zichron Trua, refers to the minority of occurrences. That seems strange. Why would that be? Moreover, what would be the problem of blowing on Shabbos? So the Gemara, I'm going to read through the end of the Gemara first, and then I'm going to circle back to this, because this is really what I want to try and understand. So the Gemara goes on to say, Amar Rava, Imidaraisa b'mikdash hechatakina. He doesn't exactly ask the questions I asked so far. Rava asks a different question. Rava says, I don't understand. If you need a pasuk, if the pasuk tells you you don't blow shofar on Shabbos, then how can you blow it in the mikdash? If that's a biblical violation, transgression, then why can you do it in the Beis HaMikdash? If anything, we should even be more scrupulous in the Beis HaMikdash to make sure that everything is done properly, as opposed to the Medina, right? So how do we understand that? Okay.
In Shvus
Oh, what's that?
In Shvus b'mikdash.
Ein Shvus Mikdash is if something is Drabanan.
But the whole
Shvus
takona of blowing
b'mikdash is-
shofar
Yeah.
on Rosh Hashana, they shouldn't carry it in the street.
No, because you're already at the Maskana. I didn't read the Maskana yet. I'm talking about the Rava's question in the Havamina.
All right.
So you know too much.
No, I don't.
But I'm interested, what I'm going to try to show is that this discussion in the Gemara, even though there is a Maskana, remains somewhat relevant. For some sources, very relevant. For others, somewhat relevant. That's why I'm spending so much time on it, because I'm going to try to suggest, no secrets here between, it's like a massive chavrusa here, So what I'm going to try to suggest is that this idea of shofar not being blown b'Shabbos isn't just a side din, technical din. It's something that really tells us something important about the day, about Tkiyah shofar, about the tefillas, etc. That's going to be my goal. That's what I want to reach in the end. You'll decide if I got there or not. So, for
Rabbi,
that,
don't we bring a carbon musaf on Shabbos? That seems to violate Shabbos in
Excellent.
the mikdash.
Excellent. But that is a special law that it's impossible. You have to bring a carbon musaf on Shabbos. And by the way, if Rosh Hashana falls on Shabbos, you bring the carbon musaf of Rosh Hashana on Shabbos too. But that's because that's built in. That is we know from the Torah that you're obligated to do that. Every Shabbos you bring the musaf Shabbos. So that's a permissible behavior. But you can't, and I'm going to use that comparison very soon, but you can't compare that to something which isn't part and parcel, right? Which happens occasionally, where we don't know that it's Mechal Shabbos. We know that you could every Shabbos you're Mechal Shabbos for korbanos, not any korban, but the korbanos of Shabbos, and we know that if Yom Tov is a korban shekavua lo zman. So if Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, if Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, if Pesach falls out on Shabbos, anytime any korban musaf, even not of Shabbos, but of the other Yom Tov fall out on Shabbos, that's just part of the rule. It's a kind of what we call hutra, right? Meaning that's built in. Just like you bring a korban on Shabbos musaf, you bring a korban musaf, you bring the korbanos of Yom Kippur on Yom Kippur, and so on. But
So I have
when you have something which isn't built in structurally, it's much more, problematic. So what we're saying is, if you're not allowed to blow shofar, and also let's remember that the mikdash was the place to bring korbanos, and therefore you could be mechal Shabbos for the korbanos in the mikdash, right? But what is the yichus? What is the special status of the mikdash vis-a-vis tkiyah shofar? Right? If tkiyah shofar is doche Shabbos when they come together, which we'll see in a moment as a view of Tosas and the Havamina, only the Havamina, then fine, let it be even in Medina. If not, then why is it even in the mikdash? Right? The example that you brought of korbanos is, of course, korbanos are doche, Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they're only brought in the mikdash. But that's not the case for shofar. So it's not comparable, but it is something to keep in the back of our minds because we're going to get back to it in a couple of minutes. The Chazan had a comment. Go ahead. Or we're good.
Can't hear him.
We don't hear you.
He thought he was on mute before because you didn't let him stop you. So now he has to unmute himself.
Okay, go ahead.
Rabbi, we, regardless whether it's on Shabbos or not on Shabbos, at the conclusion of all the psukim of Shofros, is Shomea kol teruah samo Yisrael berachamim. Shomea. What are we making the bracha if we are not blowing the shofar?
Great. So I'll talk about that too. I'll talk about, since, this is obviously close to your heart. And I'm going to, in a minute, I'm going to transition to the Nusach HaTfilah, even on a bigger question. And that is, how do we characterize the day? Which pasuk do we quote in the Nusach HaTfilah, in the Kedushas Hayom, of the Shemona Esrei? Yom Trua Yelachem or Zichron Trua? So I'll get to that in just a second. Okay. That's also part of the same idea. So we'll get to that. Okay. So first, let's read the conclusion of the Gemara because I don't want to leave anybody, misled. And it was already mentioned that this is not the maskana of the Bavli, but we still need to understand, even what they originally thought, and especially if there continue to be echoes of it. So this is what I want to zero in on. So the Gemara says two things. Number one, if it's Doraisa, there should be no difference between the Mikdash and Gvulin. Okay. The Ode, Holav Malachahi, the Itzrich Kralamute. What's the problem of blowing shofar on Shabbos? Now, 39 Avos Malacha. Blowing shofar is not one of them. The Tana de Beis Shmuel, Komalaka Savoda Losasu, Yatz Tkiya Shofar, Uridia Sapas, right? Shehi Chachma, Ve'ena Malacha. It's explicit that blowing shofar is not a malacha.
But it's a mashmiya kol.
It is, but that's a din drabanan maybe. The chashash of Shema Yitakein Kli Shiur. That's only a shvus. And we've heard before, Ein shvus b'mikdash, right?
Yeah.
Rethink right now, the Gemara says, what's the doraisa? Where's the doraisa? Okay. So the Gemara says, El Amarava, and this is the conclusion, Andy, that you were referring to. Midoraisa Mishrashari, it's permissible to blow shofar on Shabbos Minat Torah. Rabbanan hu de Gazer Bey, it's Exer Rabbanan. Kid Rabba, Amarabba, Hakochayam B'tkiya Shofar, Ena Kol B'kiyan B'tkiya Shofar, Zera Shemit Lena B'yado, V'yela Chetzel Baki Lilmod, V'yavinu Daladamos B'shus Harabim, V'hainu Tamid Lula, V'hainu Tamid Megillah. So basically the Gemara says, Minat Torah, you can blow shofar. This Mishnah is referring to a rabbinic enactment, lest people get too excited about Tkiyah Shofar, forget that it's Shabbos, pick it up and walk in Rosh Hashana. Not allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos and carry the shofar, Mirshus L'Shus or Dalad Amos B'Shus Harabim. And therefore, because of the fear that you would violate that, and the excitement of doing the mitzvah, they canceled shofar on the first day. Remember, the first day is the main day, it's the real day. We have the second, that's why I started the way I started. The second day is Yom HaRichta, but that's a rabbinic extension. The first day is the real day of Rosh Hashana. They canceled shofar on Rosh Hashana out of the fear, Shema Yavirenu Dalad Amos B'Shus Harabim. And then the Gemara says, V'hainu Tamid de Lulav, V'hainu Tamid de Megillah. They did something similar to Lulav. You're supposed to take Lulav on the first day of Yom Tov. But they canceled that when it's Shabbos. Shema Yavirenu Dalad Amos B'Shus Harabim. They also canceled Megillah right on Shabbos. If the day of Purim falls out on Shabbos, we don't read the Megillah on that day for the same reason. Now, the Megillah is a din d'Rabbanan. Okay, so the fact that Chayshinan, that we're worried about violating a Doraisa, and therefore we canceled the D'Rabbanan, not the end of the world. But the idea that we canceled Shofar Doraisa because of the fear that you might make a mistake, that is quite interesting. But they did something similar with Lulav, didn't they? So I want to show several things, and then I'm going to explain what I think it's all about. But what I really want to demonstrate, firstly, is that all of this is pretty intriguing, and it's pretty astonishing. All different facets. So let me explain. Let me begin with the first point. It sounds like, I already asked the question. The Gemara originally thought that Zichron Trua refers to Shabbos. I mean, Zichron Trua is the exception, and Yom Trua is the rule. Why would they say that? I understand, because Zichron means Zecher Le Trua, where you don't actually blow. But isn't it extraordinary that when they thought this, that Parshas Emor would be the minority case, exception and not the rule? What I asked before. Now you could say, okay, big deal, it's a Havamina, we don't paskin that way. However, several things need to be noted. Number one, the Yerushalmi in a parallel passage does paskin this way. The Talmud Yerushalmi never goes back on the idea that blowing shofar on Shabbos is prohibited minat Torah. And the source for it is the same source. There's difference between Yom Trua Yelachem and Zichron Trua. So on the surface, according to the Yerushalmi, Lahalacha, we don't paskin like the Yerushalmi. But it's not just a Havavina. It's not just, like an exercise. This is the conclusion of the Yerushalmi. Look at the Yerushalmi very quickly. That's the next entry. We can skip the Mishnah part. The Gemara says, Rab Abba bar Papa Rab Yochanan, the Reish Lakish have a Yosvin, they were sitting around, Makshin, and they asked, Omrin, Tzninin, Yontav Shorosh Shechol Yos B'Shabbos, B'Mikdash Hayu Token, Avalo B'Medina. Right? They quoted the Mishnah that you don't blow shofar outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and they said the following: In Dvar Torahu, Af B'Gvulin Yidcha. If this is a din d'oraisa that you can blow on Shabbos, and that's why you do it in the Mikdash, why can't you do it in the Gvulin? Right? In Leis to Dvar Torah, Af B'Mikdash Lo Yidcha. If Minat Torah you're not allowed to, then you shouldn't be allowed to in the Mikdash either. Of our Kahana, right? Omrin Haigavarabba Denishale. Right? So they Rav Kahana was passing by. They said, a big Talmud Chacham, we can ask him this question. Atun Sha'olun Le, they went and they asked him. Omar Lun, he said to them, Kosav Echad Omer Yom Trua, Kosav Echad Omer Zikron Trua. Okay, Tzad, V'shashu Chal B'chol Yom Trua, V'shashu Chal B'Shabbos, excuse me, Zikron Trua. Mazkirin, we mentioned the psukim, right? Probably. Avalo token. By the way, that's probably why we say Shomea ki Shomea kol shofar, because we do mention the psukim, right? We'll get to even more in a minute. Then the Gemara goes on. Yerushalmi, just to show you they don't turn back from this. Rab Zeira Mifked Lechavre, right? Ulun, the Shamin, Khaled Rab Levi, Darash, de los Efshar du Mapik Parshasa de Leolf. Rab Zeira told his friends that whenever Rab Levi darshans, it's kedai to listen to him, because he always says chidushim. You never go to Rab Levi's drasha and walk away and say, I knew that was obvious. You always learn something new. Okay? It's a big bracha, right? The Olvi Amar Kumeim, what was the new thing that he said? The same thing. Kosav Echad Yom Yom Trua, Kosav Echad Omer Zichron Trua, okay, Tzad. B'shoshu Chal B'Shabbos Yom Trua, B'shoshu Chal B'Shabbos Zichron Trua, Mazkirin Avalo Token. Says the Yerushalmi, Me'ata Af B'Mikdash L'Yidcha. So why is the Mikdash different? Why is that an exception? Now in the Bavli, that question destroyed the Havamina. Rava said, if you're not distinguishing between Mikdash and Gvulin, it must be Drabanan. In the Yerushalmi, the question is asked and the answer is given. Tana be'echad lachodesh. The pasuk echad b'chodesh, no matter what, even if it's Shabbos, plays out in the Mikdash. Is that because in the Mikdash they at least knew for sure that it was Rosh Hashana, whereas every other place they were hedging their bets, they weren't sure whether it was today or tomorrow? Tana Rajbi v'kravtem. The Mokom Shakarbonos craven. He says, no, that's not the reason. The reason is because says v'yikravtem, the mokom sheyesh karbanos. By the way, Adele made a suggestion before that maybe this is like karbanos, right? So actually, the Yerushalmi is a little bit connecting it to karbanos, and the Ravid in his parish on the Rif says that there's a special din of Tkiya shofar in the Mikdash. The psukim imply that first and foremost, the mitzvah of Tkiya shofar is in the Mikdash. That's a chiddush of the Ravid. And the Yerushalmi says something similar. Minat Torah, you can't blow b'gvulin, the Medina, but you could blow b'mikdash based on this pasuk, this connection to karbanos, or this equation to karbanos. So what comes out of the Yerushalmi? That Zichron Trua refers to Shabbos, and the Yom Trua refers to Chol. It's a very fascinating phenomenon. Let me go a step further. I mentioned the Nusach HaTfilah. I know I don't want to put the Chazan on the spot.
It's okay.
But I'm sure he's always prepared. When Shabbos, when Rosh Hashana is on Shabbos, what do you say in the Kedushas Hayom?
Mekadesh HaShabbos.
No. When you not before the Chasima, when you refer to the day on Chol, our practice I'm talking about. I'm going to show you in a minute. On Chol, you say Yom Trua.
Right.
Yom Trua, or something like that. I don't want. I'm having troubles with my voice all the time.
Okay.
Either way, I wouldn't want to compete with the Chazan.
No.
But when it's Rosh Hashana Shakolios B'Shabbos,
I don't think you are.
We
Yeah,
still
you're right.
say Yom Teruah. We still
What do
say Yom Teruah. We don't say Yom Zichron Teruah.
we do. Sure we do.
At some of the piyutim.
No. Even in the Tefillah.
Wow.
If you look in the Tefillah,
Not the Yutim, we're talking about davening.
in the davening, if you look in the Machzor,
It's okay. I'm
in the
sorry.
Machzor it says, I'll show you where it is in the Shulchan Aruch in a minute, where you say Yom Zichron Trua.
Yeah.
Look on turn to page 3 of the Marmakomos for a minute. This is, I think it's very, very important. Does everybody have page 3? This comes originally from Masachet Sofrim, which was very early. And it was accepted by most communities, not all, we'll see in a moment. Does everybody have the Beis Yosef Archaim Siman Tov Kuf Pei Beis? Is that a yes? On page 3? Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate the heads up. Good. Umasha Kosav, Shimchol Rosh Hashana B'chol, Omer, in the Nusach HaTfilah.
Well, in the tefillah itself, we have Hayu Lachem Lezikoron Lifnei Elokeichem.
Not sure what happened to the rabbi. I assume he'll call back in.
Blame Jacob, he's in control.
I don't see him on right now. I think he got disconnected. He's probably going to call back in.
That's a Zikaron Tequila.
Someone insulted his voice and he got upset, you know.
Hello?
We can hear you.
We can hear
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting back on. I don't know what happened. I don't know. It was,
We can see you
okay.
partially.
We were talking about Yom Trua, and then we lost you.
Yeah. Okay. You know, maybe these things are hashkach. I was probably about to say something that isn't true.
Okay.
Okay. Are we back on?
Okay. I was
Okay. I was also going to be. Yeah. No, I'm going to.
Yeah, I'm going to get off. Okay. I was trying to get on through my phone if I couldn't get back on through my computer, but my technological savvy allowed us to get back on. Okay. So what I was trying to say was that if you look at the Beis Yosef, everybody can hear now?
Back on.
Is everybody hearing?
Yes, Rabbi, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for the disruption, but it gave everybody a chance to think about what we've been discussing. So basically, the Beis Yosef quotes that Dumasha Kosav Shem Chol Rosh Hashana B'Chol Yom Omer Yom Trua Mikra Kodesh V'Imchal B'Shabbos Omer Zichron Trua Kach Kosav Arosh Perik Sof Rosh Hashana V'chein Kosav B'Masachet Sofer in Perik Tes V'Chol Rosh Hashana Lios B'Shabbos if Rosh Hashana falls on a Shabbos Ena Omer Yom Trua Ela Zichron Trua Lefi She'en Shofar Docha Shabbos B'Gvulin the Masachet Sofer adds Mishum Gzeira. Then in the continuation, the Beis Yosef quotes something very interesting. The Kasu b'Trumas Hadeshen, one of the great authorities of Ashkenaz, Nir Lomar, Yesh Lomar b'Kiddush Tfilas Arve Zichron Shua, Afil Keshachol Yos B'Chol. Delilah Lav Zman Truahi. Aval Ha'olam Lo Noag Uchein, Atam Mishum de Lo Dami L'Shabbos, Achar Hu Yoma, Zman Trua Hu L'Machar. So let me explain what's going on here. We had a Gemara which said that originally we thought that the Mishnah that says you can't blow shofar on Shabbos is based on Zichron Trua, and that when Rosh Hashanah falls during Chol, that's Yom Trua Yalachem. But the Gemara turns its back on that and said it was only a Gzeira D'Rabbanan. Either way, we were surprised that the Yerushalmi, which holds this way, and that Bavli, before it retracted, thought that the word Zichron Trua could apply to the minority rather than the majority, to the exception rather than to the rule, when that's the main pasuk in Parshas Emor of the Moed. Correct? But now we're seeing that actually, even according to the Bavli's conclusion, right, Minhag Klal Yisrael is that we characterize the day of Rosh Hashana Shechol Yos B'Shabbos. You'll see in our tefillos, it's Rosh Hashana on Shabbos, as opposed to the next day, the second day. We call it Zichron Trua, and not Yom Trua. Meaning, why would we want in our Nusach HaTfilah to reflect the Din D'Rabbanan? Is the Nusach HaTfilah like a primer, right, to tell you what you're supposed to and not supposed to do. It just reflects the facts. Very strange to think so. We're talking about the Kedushas Hayom. Let me take it a step further. Then the Beis Yosef quotes the Trumas Hadeshen. On the bottom of this page, the Trumas Hadeshen's tshuva is available to you. It's going to take too much time, so I'm not going to read it. It's Siman Kuf Mem Hey. It's a very interesting tshuva, where the Trumas Hadeshen was wondering about the following. At night, during Mariv and during Kiddush and Rosh Hashana, should you quote the pasuk of Yom Trua or Zichron Trua? After all, you don't blow shofar at night. You're not blowing shofar during your meal, and you're not blowing it during Mariv.
Yeah, but it's one day. It's one day. I mean, the night and day go together. So if you blow that day, then the night before is.
So the Beis Yosef's conclusion is that you should say Yom Trua, because it's the same day, exactly what you said. What was the Trumas Hadeshen's idea? The Trumas Hadeshen said, listen, the only reason you don't blow shofar on Shabbos is because of Gzeira D'Rabbanan, right?
Correct. Correct.
So that means, in fact, you don't blow. Is it a Yom Trua, though? I mean, a Torah, should you blow? Sure. And yet we call it Zichron Trua. So the Trumas Hadeshen says, I think at night you should also call it Zichron Trua.
Uh-huh.
The Beis Yosef says, your distinction, Jacob, very good. And that is, well, it's
Yom
one thing
Arisa, yeah.
if you could, but you don't. It's quite another thing when it's just not the time. But you know what? I might have said exactly the opposite. If somebody gave me the option and said to me, you know, a puzzle, you know, when do you say Yom Trua? When do you say Zichron Trua? And they said to me, what about at night? And what about Shabbos? You know what I would have said? I would say maybe at night you should always say Zichron, because you never blow at night. But on Shabbos, you don't blow, in fact, but you should be blowing. In the Mikdash, you're blowing, right? What I'm trying to show is, especially according to the Beis Yosef, that the Nusach HaTfilah doesn't only show what we actually do. The Nusach HaTfilah reflects the Kedushas Hayom. So at night we say Yom Trua because even though you're not going to blow right now, it's the day of Tkiyah Shofar. Isn't Shabbos also the day of Tkiyah Shofar according to the Maskana of the Gemara? Look at the Aruch HaShulchan for a minute. Look on page. Look on page. One second. Over here. Is everybody still there? Okay. Look on the bottom of page 4. There's a very interesting Aruch HaShulchan. Everybody hearing me still? Since we had problems before. Okay, good. The Aruch HaShulchan says the following. Afal pi shezeh shein token b'Shabbos u'midrabanan mishum gzeira. Even though the reason we don't blow shofar on Shabbos is only an enactment, and it's only midrabanan, right? Mikol makom gama Torah ramzal hazeh. This is a very fascinating Aruch HaShulchan. Nonetheless, the Torah actually hints at this state of affairs, right? So the Parshas Pinchas ksiv Yom Trua Yalachem, the Parshas Emor ksiv Zichron Trua. V'zeu k'shechal b'Shabbos deino Zichron Trua v'leo Yom Trua. The Aruch HaShulchan says you might have thought that that Gemara was only according to the original thinking, but l'maskana, that's not the pshat in Zichron Trua or Yom Trua. He said, well, that's wrong. The Torah itself kind of predicted and was merames to the later Gzeira D'Rabbanan of Shemei Avi Random. That's remarkable in its own right, which means another example that Rosh Hashana Cholios B'Shabbos is the day of Zichron Trua, not the day of Yom Trua. Even according to the Maskana of the Gemara, according to the Yerushalmi for sure, the Havamim of the Gemara for sure, according to the Nusach HaTfilah for sure. By the way, going back to page 3 for a moment, the Bach points out that Rav Hai Gaon was of the opinion that every year, even when Rosh Hashanah is on Chol, you should say the words Zichron Trua. And the Bach didn't understand it. Look here at the Bach on page 3 in the Mar Makomos. Says the Bach, Hakol Kasav Ba'ashri, the Sof Rosh Hashanah. All of this is discussed by the Rosh in the end of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Elish Rabbeinu Shina v'Kasav Divrei Rav Hai, Samach l'Divrei Rav Shmuel Bar Chafni, Sherav Hai Amar, Elas Yom HaZikaron Hazeh, Zichron Trua, D'mash Medecholek Adivrei Harashbach, Shemechalek Ben Shabbos L'Chol. Ela Leolam Yomar Zichron Trua. Rav Hai Gaon was of the opinion that every Rosh Hashanah, even if it's Chol, you don't say the pasuk in Parshas Pinchas. You say the pasuk in Parshas Emor.
Emor.
That's more like. What's fascinating is that the Bach doesn't understand it. Well, it is against the practice of Klal Yisrael. It's against Masechet Sofrim. It's against most of the Rishonim. But that's not what he asks. He asks the following: the Tzorich Tam Lama. Dimi should eksiv Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh Gabei Yom Trua Loksiv. Right? Hello, Rav Hai Svir Lebesamuch Dein Omer Mikra Kodesh. And then he says, Ubetrumas Hadeshen discusses Mishum Laila Lav Zman Trua. Then maybe you should say Zichron. I mean, basically, the Bach says, I don't understand why Rav Hai would say Zichron Trua. Why not say Yom Trua? I understand it, though. I like it very much. We don't do this, but meaning the main pasuk in Parshas Emor is the one you should say. And as I'm going to explain in a couple of minutes, maybe there's even more reason one would think to say it.
What makes that the main one? How do we decide who's main? Rabbi said there's Yom Trua. It's two different places.
Yeah. Because I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, that the main parsha of the Moadim should also be the venue for the main pasuk. There are two parshas HaMoadim in the Torah. One is an Emor, where the Torah just speaks about the Moadim. The second parsha of the Moadim is really through the Musafim. It's really the parsha in Pinchas that begins with the Tmidim, and then talks about Rosh Chodesh, and then it talks about, Tmidim, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and then the Moadim, but from the vantage point of the Karbanos. But the main parsha of Kedushas Hazman, not Karbanos, is an Emor. Therefore, I find it intriguing that
the Zichron
Trua would be used in the minority of cases when there's no shofar, when that is truly. I understand it from a linguistic point of view, because you're saying we don't blow the shofar, we mention the shofar. I just find it interesting that in Parshas Emor, we would be emphasizing that, and I want to know why. I'm using Rav Hai Gaon to explain. Rav Hai Gaon thought you should always say Zichron Trua, even all the rest of the year, even when we do blow shofar. And the Bach said, why? I think the answer of why is because it's in Parshas Emor. That's the main description of Rosh Hashanah. The Trumas Hadeshen wanted to break it down further, say whenever in fact you blow, Yom Trua. When you don't in fact blow, Zichron Trua. But he says that, but the Beit Yosef doesn't paskin that way. We don't paskin that way. We say Yom Trua even at night, and we say Zichron Trua only on Shabbos. Right?
During the day.
Why is all this?
You mean
Go ahead.
No, you mean during the day. At night you say Yom Teruah, but during the day you say Yom Zichron Teruah.
Well, on Shabbos you say Yom...
On Shabbos, of course.
Zichron Trua for everything. 100%. Yeah. During the day you say Yom Trua. When Rosh Hashanah is called B'chol, our psak is you say Yom Trua across the board. And when it's B'Shabbos, you say Zichron Trua across the board. The Trumas Hadeshen wanted to distinguish between Erev and Laila B'chol, and the Rav Hai Gaon is of the opinion that you always say Zichron Trua no matter what, even B'chol. Those are four different opinions. But I'm trying to show the Yerushalmi has Zichron Trua on Shabbos. The Bavli had it as a Havamina. The Aruch HaShulchan considers it to be even the Maskana. If you look at some of the Rishonim, the Ravan, the Rokeach, they continue to speak about Zichron Trua, even once the Gemara introduced the Gzeira, Shem Yavirenu. It's fascinating that some of the Achronim suggest that Beis Shammai would hold this way. Why Beis Shammai? Okay, so Beis Shammai, because of the following. What does the Gemara say? The Gemara says that why don't we blow shofar on Shabbos? Shema Yavirenu Daled Amos B'Rishus HaRabbi. Correct? So how can you blow shofar on Rosh Hashana, which is Bechal?
There's no problem. Shema Yavirenu.
Why not? You're not allowed to do Malach on Yontif.
You're allowed to carry.
Correct. Why are you allowed to carry?
Tzarech mitzvah. I don't know.
Because mitov shehutra letzorech, hutra shelo letzorech. Okay. It doesn't have to be tzorech mitzvah, but tzorech k'tzah, whatever. Correct. Oh, so the Achronim, I'm not going to read it inside because it's already a little late, but we have it on the Marmakomos, the Pri Megadim, and others. They ask the following question. That's great for Beis Hillel, but not for Beis Shammai. Why? In Masechet Beitza, and Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the Mishnah records a debate between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel said, you're allowed to carry on Yontif if you want to carry a Tinok, you want to carry a Sefer Torah, not just if you want to carry food. Why? Because Beis Hillel, the Gemara explains, hold mitov shehutra l'tzorech, hutra shelo l'tzorech. But Beis Shammai disagrees. Beis Shammai say, you're allowed to carry for ochel nefesh, for food. But you're not allowed to carry Sefer Torah in a katan. So some of the Achronim say, well, if that's the case, then if you're going to apply Sheva Yavirenu Daled Amos B'Rishus HaRabim to Shabbos, you should apply it also to Yontif. And then there's never going to be Tkiyah Shofar. Right? So it could be that according to Beis Shammai, the whole reasoning of Shema Yavirenu Lahalacha, this is what some Achronim say, doesn't apply. Meaning, according to Beis Shammai, the whole discussion that we just read won't work. So what do we do for Beis Shammai? There are two possibilities. Well, there's more. One view, the Pri Megadim's view is, Beis Shammai thought you should blow shofar on Shabbos in Medina. And there's another suggestion. Beis Shammai, like the Yerushalmi, thought that the reason you can't blow on Shabbos, is because of Zichron Trua. Wow. So it's not only Yerushalmi, not only Havamim and the Bavli, not according to still Merumas and the Ravan and the Rokeach. Not only is it an Arnusach HaTzvila, right? According to Beis Shammai, that would be, we don't paskin like Beis Shammai, but Beis Shammai is a very legitimate. So all the questions that we asked return. What is this? And why the difference between Mikdash and Gevula? Okay? Oh. So let me mention one other question, and then I'll tell you what I think is really happening here. Some of the Achronim asked the following question. Rabbi Eliezer, in Masechet Sukkah and elsewhere, is of the opinion that Tov b'dvar mitzvah, if a person does an Aveira, sheish bo korban, but he does it in the pursuit of a mitzvah accidentally, he's trying to do a mitzvah, and he gets too excited, and that's called Tov b'dvar mitzvah. There's no chiyuv korban. Ask some of the Achronim, the whole Zera Shemi Avirenu Daled Amos B'Rishus HaRabim is a bit of a surprise because it's Tov b'dvar mitzvah. Seems like a chumra yisera. Let me go a step further. The Gemara says that the din of Shemi Avirenu Daled Amos B'Rishus HaRabim, the maskana, the real reason why we don't blow shofar on Shabbos, right? The Gemara says Hainu Lulav, Hainu Megillah. We have it also by Megillah and by Lulav. Now, by Megillah, it's not the same at all. because the Megillah itself is only midrabanan. It's only a rabbinic obligation to begin with.
Sure.
So if you want to drop it because you're worried that you might violate a bigger obligation, a bigger violation, that makes sense. But the truth is that the comparison to lulav is not perfect either. Look back on page 1 for a minute. Tosas asks this question. Towards the bottom of the page, you have Tosas Rosh Hashana. Go down to the second line. Bim Tomar. Umay shnami lulav shayanita lafilu bigvulim bizman shemesa bigdash yakayim. If you look carefully at the Gemara in Sukkah, which I'm not going to read now, it's late, the Gemara seems to say that the only time that they applied the Gzeira, Shemi Avirenu Dalad Amos B'Shus Arabim, they canceled Lulav Doraisa because of worry about carrying the shofar, carrying the Lulav, sorry, is only after the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, where they were not 100% sure. It was the diaspora, right? They couldn't be sure exactly, whether it was the right day. They weren't sure it was really Sukkot. So they made the Gzeira. We think it's Sukkot. Gzeira Shemi Aviren. And they applied that in Israel too. But back in the time where they for sure knew that it was Sukkot, in other words, when the Beis HaMikdash was Kayim, they actually did bring the lulav on Shabbos, on the first day. So Tosa says, how come the first day of shofar is shofar doraisa? I'm sorry, the first day of Rosh Hashana is shofar doraisa. The first day of lulav is lulav doraisa. How come when in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they brought lulav doraisa on the first day, but even in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they don't bring shofar doraisa on the first day? That's strange, isn't it? Tosas gives technical answers. Maybe one is tiltul and one is worse. One, they were able to mostly know the day because it was 15 days after Rosh Chodesh. The other day it's the same day. Tosas gives technical answers to this question. But what Tosas points out is that we're much more machmir in Tkiyah Shofar because of the Gzeira Shemi Avirenu than we are in Lulav.
And in Lulav, don't you have Shema Avirenu?
We do, but only after the Churban, when they weren't 100% sure that it was the right day. At the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was no Shema Avirenu, only for Shofar. That's very strange. Another discrepancy in the opposite direction that Tosas asks. Tosas says the following. How come when it comes to Shofar, even after the Churban, they made a takana that b'makom bezdin, whenever you're in a place of a bezdin, you can blow shofar even on Shabbos, a proper bezdin, maybe Supreme Court, whatever. There's no such law in Lulav. After the Churban, they said you can't take the Lulav on Shabbos anymore, not even in the Mikdash.
Well, there was no Mikdash, so...
No. So what's going? Let's sum it up this way. During the time of the Mikdash, right? They allowed lulav on Shabbos, but not shofar. After the time of the Mikdash, they allowed shofar in a makom bezdin, but they didn't allow lulav. So you have a contradiction. You have which is more stringent and which is more lenient. Very strange. In addition to all the questions that I've asked. I'm going to tell you what I think the answer is, because we're getting a little late. It covers so many other things, but this is, I think, the idea. Partly it's based on a line in Tosas to explain the second discrepancy. Remember, Tosas said, how come shofar they made a takana after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed that you could blow in a makom bezdin, and they didn't make a parallel takana for lulav? Why not? There are answers to this as well, but one of the answers in Tosas is very inspiring. Look at back of the Tosas and go 4 lines up from the bottom of the piece. Yesh lomar, the shofar shehu Lahalo zichroneim sheYisrael, lavian shabashamayim, lo ratzu levata legamri. Also says, shofar, in which so much is at stake, right? It's the vehicle that brings our zichronos to the Ribono Shel Olam. They just couldn't let it go. Even after the Mikdash, they needed that at least there be one place in the world where there's Tkiyas Shofar. The idea of a world on Rosh Hashana absent Tkiyas Shofar was unacceptable. But wouldn't you think that that would also be more of a reason to allow it on the first day? Right? Just like love. I think this is exactly the answer. Shofar is both more indispensable than lulav in some respects, and it is also more sensitive to being done or requires to be done al Taras HaKodesh in a way that doesn't sacrifice its very own purpose. What is shofar? Rambam says in Hilchos Shofar, shofar is a wake-up call for tshuva. Uru, Yeshenim, Yeshinaskim.
Not him.
Right? Those who are been slumbering along in their life, meaning will sleep, meaning, you know, they kind of go with the flow, a certain level of inertia. They take the easy way out, but they just not cognizant necessarily about their spiritual profile sufficiently all year round. Rosh Hashanah is a wake-up call. The shofar is the vehicle for that wake-up call, right? To reassess who we are and what our priorities are. Right? So Yom Adin, the calendar establishes Yom Adin, and it's a Yom Teshuvah. Moreover, shofar and the trua of shofar is a mechanism of tefillah. That's what we were quoting before. They call shofar umazin. The word trua, as we know, means a cry, a shriek, or a groan. The debate about how you actually blow truos, whether it's what we call shvarim or trua, or shvarim trua, is shvarim is ginuchei ganech, it's groaning or sighing, right? A person who's assessing unfavorably, you know, his spiritual status, or the bursts of cry, like a child's cry, or both, you know, where one leads into the other. Tkiya has, in many respects, the status of tefillah. That's why we blow in Shemon Esrei, I'll say brachos. Some have the practice to blow even in tefillah b'lachash.
Sure.
And how could you do it? Isn't it a hefsek? Not a hefsek, because it's a cold tefillah. For that reason, perhaps
The only thing is when they blow the shofar during the silent Shmona Esrei, there is no bal, not a bal kriya to say that.
Okay. Oh, for sure.
You don't have that because that's mamash and hefsek.
Right. But the very notion that you could be mafsik with the tkiyos in the middle of silent Shemon Esrei shows that it's tefillah. This is a davar pasha. This is not my chiddush. This is we speak about. By the way, that might be one of the reasons why the Mikdash, according to the Ravid, according to the Yerushalmi, is an additional special place for the shofar. Right? Remember, Rava asked if it's a Doraisa problem, why is it permitted in the Mikdash? Yerushalmi, right? It is. It's a place of korbanos and it's a place of tefillah.
Does this have to do with the not talking the whole time, or nothing to do with that?
Basi, what is it we say about the Mikdash? He basi based tefillah. Ikari l'chal ha'amim. And of course, the relationship between korbanos and tefillah. Not only that, the Ritva in one place says shows Avera that if you steal a shofar, steal a shofar, you can't use it for the shofar because it's a mitzvah by means of an Avera. Says the Ritva, that applies to shofar because shofar is an act of ritzui. It's an act of shevach and hodah, and it's a kind of a korban. Why? The Gemara says that you can't use the shofar, the keren of a para, of a cow, because of the paraduma. They say, in kategar nasa sanegar, right? The prosecutor can't become the defender.
Mhm.
And they compare it to big days of the golden garments that are not worn by the Kohen Gadol when he's nichnas lefnai v'lefnim. Because again, the Egel Azah. So the Gemara says about Tkiyah Shofar, it's a kol which is nichnas lefnai v'lefnim. The kol itself, meaning there is a kesher, according to some, between the mikdash, tefillah, karbonos, knisa lefnai v'lefnim, and the shofar. So what's the idea is that the shofar is both more indispensable, but also more sensitive to being completely sidetracked or undermined. If you're going to do the shofar in a way that potentially leads to a violation of Hilchos Shabbos, where's the benefit in that? Because in the end of the day, the shofar isn't just a mitzvah in its own right. The shofar weighs our spiritual profile vis-a-vis all of our obligations all year round. How tragic would it be if Tkiyah Shofar led to Chilul Shabbos? It wouldn't just be, oh, Chilul Shabbos overrides, or the potential of Chilul Shabbos overrides Tkiyah Shofar. I think the bigger idea is this is Kadesh Yavo Zichronosechem Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For that reason, if you could do it properly, like the Mokom Bezdin, then it's even more indispensable than Lulav. If you can't, we'd rather you not do it because of the reason that you do it when you do it, right? Rather than risk it being the vehicle, right, for hypocrisy or for undermining its own goal. Getting back to, I mentioned there's a question.
Unlike bris, to be clear, bris because it's Xeris HaKasev that you could do it, right?
Yeah, bris is, Doraisa overrides, 100%.
Right.
So what we're saying here is, what I'm suggesting here, I've seen half of this is in Tosis. The other half I'm speculating. There are other answers Rishonim give to this question. In that sense, I'm trying to suggest a unifying principle, namely something that will explain why shofar is both more and less. It's both for the same reason. I mentioned before that some Parshim ask, according to Rabbi Eliezer or whatever, who says that Tov b'dvar mitzvah, you're punted from a korban. So even if you end up carrying on Shabbos, you didn't do it on purpose, you did it out of excitement, it's a shofar, it's not the end of the world. But according to what I'm suggesting, it is the end of the world. We're not interested in whether you're exempt from the korban. We're interested in keeping Tkiyah Shofar pure, Altaris HaKodesh. We want Tkiyah Shofar to be perceived as being connected to your broader assessment of who you are. If it's going to bring about transgressions, even ones for which you are patur, which is onosivam, you've defeated the purpose. If that's the case, then maybe we can understand all the Zichron Trua references. Let me highlight it by the following points. The Sefer Yom Trua, Kapos Tmarim, or Moshe Ibn Chaviv, asked the famous question. He says, I don't understand the Bavli, which originally thought that Zichron Trua refers to Rosh Hashana Shechal B'Shabbos. Because the Gemara already uses it up. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashana Daf Chav Ches that even if you don't need kavana for achilas matzah, it's the same surface kavana, maybe you need kavana for tkiyas shofar. Why? The Gemara says because Tkiyah Shofar, the Torah says, Zichron Trua. Rashi, I already mentioned this, in his Parish on the Torah says Zichron Trua means the psukim of Zichronos.
And the shofars.
Yeah. So the Kaplas Smarim says, how are you going to have all those limudim, Mitzvah Shrichos Kavana, Zichronos and Shofros, if you're going to use it up for Rosh Hashana Shecholios B'Shabbos? But what I think the answer is as follows. What's significant about Zichron Trua as opposed to Yom Trua, and the reason it's in Parshas Emor, even though it's a much more difficult phrase, is precisely because Zichron Trua basically fills in the blanks. It says, you know what's important about the Ma'aseh Mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar, about Yom Trua Yelachem? It's the Zichron Trua. It's the fact that Shofar is a vehicle. Kedei shetamli, Gemara says in Rosh Hashana, Tazayin, Kedei shetamlichuni alechem.
Lechem. Yeah, but that's Malchuyos. But that's Malchuyos also.
Second, Zichronosechem lifanai.
Yeah.
Ubameh, the Shofar. The reason that Zichron Trua can teach you all these things is because they're all the same idea. They are the idea that says that Tkiyah Shofar isn't just a musical note, a mitzvah bi'alma. It's not like picking up Lulav. Lulav is also very important, by the way. I don't want to downgrade Lulav. It's very important. But Shofar isn't just a regular mitzvah. Shofar is a mitzvah which requires perspective. That's why it requires extra kavanah. That's why it requires accompanying psukim. It integrates with tefillah precisely by being Zichron Trua.
Oh, that's something.
So now let's go back to our original.
internet.
According to the Havamim of the Gemara, according to the Yerushalmi, according to the Ramaz of the Aruch HaShulchan, according to the Nusach HaTfilah, as we paskin, I'm pretty sure, that we say Zichron Trua, it's strange. Why is the pasuk in Parshas Emor the one that we use for Rosh Hashana Shecholios B'Shabbos? And why, especially even the Maskana, it's a Din Rabbanan, why do we keep insisting on it? There is, if it's true, if what I'm saying is speculative, if it's true, then we have a very powerful answer. And that is as follows. You know, there's an expression in the Chazal, we're going to finish in 1 minute. Kishem shemekabel schar la prisha. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. I gave away the punchline. Kishem shemekabel schar ala drisha, kach mekabel schar ala prisha, which literally means, just like you get reward for speaking and for darshaning, sometimes you get reward for knowing when to be silent, when to stop. That also could be a simon for me to stop. But what I mean by it is the following. Rosh Hashana Shecholios B'Shabbos, it's L'maskana the Bavli, right? It's only Drabanan that we don't blow shofar because we're afraid. That seems like an exaggeration for such an important mitzvah d'oraisa. And even in the Havamim Anin, according to the Yerushalmi, the pasuk which speaks about not blowing shofar or the intention of shofar, that gets more press than the mitzvah itself? The answer is yes. Sometimes if you sacrifice shofar because you don't want it to be even associated, right, with the possibility of hypocrisy, inconsistency, Hil Shabbos, then you've made a more powerful statement about the shofar. You said the shofar isn't just a mitzvah. The shofar, when done properly, is the vehicle for tshuva, for tefillah, for inarticulate prayer, right? The malchus zichronos and shofar. To bring zichronoseinu, lefnei abinu shabashamayim, lahamlich, as HaKadosh Baruch. So in the Nusach HaTfilah, when they were trying to figure out, what should you say on Rosh Hashana Shecholios B'Shabbos, they weren't just making a practical primer concession. They weren't saying, well, there's no Tkiyah Shofar today, so we're not going to say Yom Trua because people might get the wrong impression, or it's just more accurate. I'm suggesting that we're going further than that. What they were saying was, if you really want to understand Shofar, its kulas and its chumras all of which are novea really from its chumras, right? The answer is Zichron Trua. And Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos is a powerful message about the consistency of the shofar and its true spiritual aspiration. If that's the case, then we can even appreciate Rav Haigon. Rav Haigon said, every year you should say Yom Zichron Trua. The pasuk in Emor is really more ambitious than Yom Trua. Even when you blow the shofar, you should know that blowing the shofar isn't just about blowing the shofar. It's about, right, being the vehicle for tshuva, for tefillah, right, and for reformulating our spiritual profile and our relationship with the Rabbanu Shalom. If that's the case, we can appreciate that on the one hand, Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos is a little bittersweet because you can't blow the shofar. And we should feel that we miss it, for sure. At the same time, the Kashem Shebekablin Schar Ladrisha Kach Mekablin Schar Laprisha is at work here. The fact that we won't risk Chil Shabbos, to accomplish this goal says so much about the goal. Therefore, it really characterizes Kedushas Hayom of a very ambitious Rosh Hashanah. Maybe the tefillos are going to be more prominent. Mazkirin Trua. In some cases, of course, if you could do both, you do both. That's the ultimate. But the lesson of Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos is a lesson not of B'diavad only, it is, but also of Lechatchila. I thought that this is particularly a significant idea, and with this I conclude, this year, because we're only now, and even then very cautiously, like emerging from our bubbles, to, rejoin some of the normative, religious behavior that we took for granted or we take for granted. In many cases, only now are people really returning to the Beis HaKnesses, to Tefillah B'Tzibur. And again, you could think that this whole period, which was certainly a precarious one, and a dangerous one, and an unhappy one, both for the terrible losses that occurred, as well as the anxiety and all the economic pain and the ripple effect of that, as well as simply lost opportunities, of family, but focus right now, of tefillah, of Talmud Torah, etc. And you could look at it in a very negative way, and mostly, we certainly wouldn't want to go through such a thing ever again. At the same time, when in a situation, like Rahman al-Islam, Abel, when we experience an absence of things that are dear to us, it's also an opportunity to intensify our appreciation of them. And understanding also that we need sometimes to sacrifice in order to be consistent. Mishmartem es nafshel seichem takes precedent over Tefillah B'Tzibur, says so much about Kedusha and Yahadus, and even about those parts of religion which had to take a backseat. It shows their integration into that bigger picture. So as we embark on a Rosh Hashana Shechalios B'Shabbos, which is still Zichron Trua, not just Zichron Trua, but I would say, which accentuates what is singular about Zichron Trua, maybe this year we have even a greater appreciation of what that can mean. How abstaining, refraining, but for the right reasons, is actually a way of accentuating how spiritually aspirational we really can be through the performance of mitzvahs. We look forward to the second day, and we look forward, to the fullness of Rosh Hashana in the Mikdash, where the fear was not there. The fact that it's a base tefillah and a makom karbanos, and all of those things combined allowed for the juggernaut. The Zichron, I suspect no one discusses this that I'm aware of. I'm just going to throw it out. What did the Chazan in the Mikdash, say on Rosh Hashana Shechol Yos B'Shabbos? Yom Trua Yelachem or Zichron Trua? I hope it was Zichron Trua for the reasons that we discussed. So I want to wish you all a Siva v'Chasiva Tova, Shnas Chaim v'Shalom.
Amen.
I mean, to you too.
We should go Mechoyel Achoyel as a community, as individuals, put our, crises behind us,
Amen.
and return to, with a greater sense of appreciation, the things that define our people. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Rabbi, Rabbi, may I ask you?
Sure.
May I ask you? Could Zikron Teruah be the silent scream, a silent shofar, an internal aspect of the shofar, which
Sure.
is without the man,
Which is what?
without the human being doing it, almost like a hefza.
I accept it all except for I don't know about the without the human being part.